musike. The Arabs took musiqa from the Greek. So the Arabs generally, al-ghina can mean music. They also use the word tarab for something that excites you. One of the words for the musician is mutrib, or the singer is a mutrib. So we get in the English language and out of the French, troubadour is probably from that derivation. So he's basically saying that that if it's something that calls to the haram, then it's like that, and other than that, it's makruh. And then he says kasama'i. Sama', if people noticed last night at the dinner when the waiters walked by and they were all talking amongst each other, Sri Abdul Fattah said, he stopped singing and said, Sama'. He was basically letting them know this is called sama', because sama' means to listen or audition, A-U-D-I-T-A. And so sama' is a tradition that arose out of the Islamic spiritual tradition, which was where people would sing qasa'id. Now the Prophet ﷺ undeniably, and nobody could deny this, had people amongst him who did sing, and Anjasha was one of them, Amr ibn al-Akwa was another. In the Sahih of Imam Muslim, he's there, he sang for the Sahaba in front of the Prophet ﷺ. We know the two jariyas that were singing, some young girls were singing on the Eid day, and Abu Bakr came in. We know in Tirmidhi and Ahmad and Bayhaqi and others, the black woman who swore an oath that if the Prophet returned safely, she would bang her drum and sing. Adribu ad-duf wa ataghanna. And the Prophet ﷺ said, if you made that, idha nadarti, right? So if you made that nadar, if you made that vow, then fulfill it. And she began to bang her drum over the Prophet ﷺ's head, and he allowed that. And then in one riwayah, Abu Bakr came in and she kept playing her drum and singing. Then the next one, Ali came in, and then Uthman came in, and then when Omar came in, she stopped, put it behind her, and then sat on her drum. And the Prophet ﷺ was amused by that and said that, even Shaitan's afraid of you. And that implies, and some of the scholars took from that a negative thing, but the scholars, and that hadith is considered a mushkil hadith, it's a problematic hadith, because you cannot make an oath in something that's prohibited, and you don't fulfill an oath if you made an oath to fulfill something that was haram. You don't fulfill that, because it's not a vow, rather, a nadar. So the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that, and in the hadith when Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu came in, he said, a mizmarum min mazamir shaitan, is this a pipe from the pipes of shaitan? And the Prophet ﷺ said, da'ahuma fa'innahu eid, leave them alone because it's an eid. So in other words, and in fact, the ulama who argue in favor of the permissibility of these things say that Abu Bakr was making a ruling over the dominant aspect of music, which is, it is a mizmar from the mazamir of shaitan. And if you look out there around the world and just look at what music is used for and the people involved in music, it's pretty clear who's running the industry. Like one of Billy Joel said, if the devil had an industry, it'd be the music industry. Well, little does he know, he does have an industry, and it is the music industry. So that's just a reality. And anybody that studies the history of a lot of these things, you'll see the type of debauchery that's involved in these things. And some of the artists are some of the lowest creatures that walk the planet. I mean, really, you just have to look at their faces after a career in music to see what type of lives they've lived. I mean, I actually wanted to take a photograph of Yusuf Islam and then put it next to it, one of the Rolling Bones, just to let people see what happens when somebody takes a spiritual path and what happens when somebody doesn't, right? And that's all you have to do, proof's in the pudding. Because, like somebody once said, at 50, everybody has the face they deserve. So basically, that's what he's saying. Now, the sama' is a tradition that the ulama differed on, undeniably, and some of the ulama prohibited. In fact, Ibn Arabi argued that sama' by his time was no longer permissible because of all of the things associated with it. And you will see in tassawwuf, you will see every generation talks about how the tassawwuf is over and the people are gone. Imam al-Junayd was already making complaints. So this is part of the overall decline and fall of spirituality in its curvilinear. It's not really curvilinear, it's just it reached its pinnacle with the Prophet ﷺ's community, and after that, the Prophet ﷺ said, لا يأتي زمان أو يوم إلا والذي بعده شر منه حتى تلقوا ربكم, which is a sound hadith that no time will come or even a day will come that is not worse than the one that preceded it until you meet your Lord. And some of the people want to limit that to the time of the Sahaba, but it's simply not true, because every generation is one generation further away from the Prophet ﷺ. So there has to be the distance. Anas radiallahu anhu said that we didn't finish burying the Prophet ﷺ until we were already feeling the naqs in our hearts, and in a riwayah, ankarna qulubana, that we were actually denying our hearts. Just his physical presence, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, was so important to their spiritual well-being, so that you can see, and that's a proof of the Prophet, how quickly it fell apart. I mean, these people that he brought together that were completely dispersed. كنتم على شفا حفرة من النار. They were literally on the brink of a hellfire. And the Prophet ﷺ came, united this people that had never been united before. And within a very short period of time, they were fighting each other again. So it's not surprising. And the Prophet ﷺ, when Abu Bakr filled that vacuum that was left by his physical disappearance, when he filled that vacuum, it's like coming into the hub, that empty space that keeps the wheel, because there's no ego there, it's the egoless space. That's what keeps the thing turning. And so Abu Bakr was able to come in, and then Omar came in. By the time Uthman gets there, the torque is so great because of all these new people come into Islam, and they don't have the spiritual qualities that the earlier people had. And so Uthman is having a more and more difficult time holding it together, and then it begins to come apart. And then Ali comes in, and by that time, the community is fragmented. So the Prophet ﷺ, getting back to this, the deterioration of the quality is something that has been remarked on since the beginning. And so it's not surprising that you'll find these constantly. Now, the Prophet ﷺ permitted alhan al-Arab, the tunes of the Arabs that were used. Lahan is the tune, and even the Quran was to be not sung but chanted with the alhan. It's permitted to chant the Quran, which is why we have Quran reciters that will chant, and the master Quran reciters learn the maqamat. So they actually know the maqam. See, if you watch them, they're doing a very sophisticated rhythm. And when they speed up, they all speed up at the same time. They can stop on a dime because they're following the ozan and the maqams that they're singing. And each one of those songs that they sing, the qasaid that they sing, have maqamat that are sung. And this is where music becomes a serious problem. The Pythagoreans worked out that music is related to geometry. And in classical Western tradition, you had what was called the quadrivium, and so you studied arithmetic first, which is number, discrete number, arithmetic, 1, 2, 3, 4. And obviously not simple arithmetic, but the meaning of numbers. Because numbers are related, all numbers are multiples of 1. Everything comes from 1. And then you went into geometry, which was number in space. And then you went into music, which was number in time and space. And then you went into astronomy, which that music, which is number in time, and then you went to astronomy, which is number in time and space. So there was a cosmology to the quadrivium, and these are related to cosmologies. Now, different maqamat affect different parts of your soul, and this is why the prohibitions of music are there, because music is very, very dangerous, and a lot of people don't know what they're doing with the music. And if you don't believe this, all you have to do is look at some documentary footage of what was called Beatlemania in the West, and how mad people went over new sounds of music that were being popularized and promoted over the airways. And rock and roll had a massive impact on people. And as it got darker and darker, and you went into these heavy metal and all these other types of, you get some really, really serious problems at these concerts where people literally will go mad. I mean, obviously there's drug involvement, and this is another reason, because you'll find many of the hadith that talk about the prohibition of music also have drugs mentioned in the same hadith. In fact, there's an argument that all of them have drugs mentioned in the same hadith. And the Prophet ﷺ said the end of time won't come until people permit. And then he said, music, I mean, basically the sex, because that's the word he used, meant that. And then drugs, intoxicants. So he actually mentioned those three together, right? Which in Western parlance is sex, drugs, and rock and roll, which became a kind of mantra of the 1960s, and we're still feeling the repercussions of that in the West since that time, which was a massive change. And Plato argued that you will never change musical modes in a society except that it will have a radical effect on the culture and nature of the society. So musical changes actually are harbingers of shifts within society. And so this is called ethos theory in the Greek tradition, that music has a powerful impact on the soul. Rumi in the Masnawi, rahimahullah, talks about the soul being really almost seduced into the body with the flute, the reed flute. And that's an indication, a mythological indication of the power that music has. And he talks about the morose sounds of the reed flute and the impact that they have on the heart. So music is very powerful, and it's really not something to be played with, because people don't know what they're doing. And in traditional, like if you go into traditional like ragas in Indian music, they have a whole science, and they know that they're having an impact on people. Al-Farabi wrote a book called Kitab al-Musiq al-Kabir, and in that book he gives you the maqamat to use that where you can make people laugh. If you play the maqams, they'll start laughing uncontrollably. You can play other maqams and they'll start crying. And so this is the power that exists in this form. What you have to understand is that the religion does not have a blanket permissibility, and it doesn't have a blanket prohibition, but it has a dialectic of tension to make sure that we don't go astray in either way. And so, for instance, what we just heard, which is sama', you can, if you're present, if your heart's open to it, it can actually have a very powerful spiritual impact on you. I mean, they can put you into a state of hudur, of presence with your Lord. And this can happen. And obviously, the Quran does this as well for people. And I don't want to put them in the same category because they're not. إِذَا جَاءَ الْحَقُّ زَهِقَ الْبَاطِلُ. Everything other than the Quran in terms of this that has a vacuity to it. But the meanings also are embodied in these words. The things that they're saying are very powerful things. Imam al-Busayri, they were just reciting very powerful meanings from Imam al-Busayri. So just to look at a few things, he says that the Imam Muhammad al-Hassan says, quoting Mafatih al-Kunuz, that sama' has three categories. The first is absolute prohibition, and this is for the majority of people, and this is the traditional view. I'm just giving you what the ulama have said. And these are for young people that become very affected by it, and the shahawat are ghaliba alayhim. When they have too much of their licentious nature is too strong. So the shahawat, the concupiscent soul, is very strong, and they haven't learned to control that yet. That this can actually arouse in them passions. And so for these people, it's not a good thing. And also because they haven't purified their hearts and worked on that. And so the sama' can actually have a negative effect on those people. And then the second one is mubah. And this is people that can listen to it and they just enjoy the sounds of it. And so it doesn't have a negative impact on them, but it's something that they take pleasure in. What yatarawwah, they get some repose or something. And the third one is mandub, and these are the people that love Allah, and it actually encourages them to get closer to Allah, that they feel a nearness from it, and so it affects them in that way. And Sidi Ahmed Zarruq in his commentary on the Baghrisiya, and this is a very interesting lafta of Sidi Ahmed Zarruq, a indication that he got out of it. He said, Amma adatul lahwi, this is in his commentary. The Baghrisiya is a famous primer that was used by the Malikis in North Africa. He was a great Algerian scholar, Abdurrahman al-Bughlisi, and his book was used for many hundreds of years as a primer like Ibn Ashir. Ibn Ashir pretty much became the dominant text. But before that, Al-Baghrisi and the Qurtubiyya were more dominant. Anyway, it's a beautiful text, and Sidi Ahmed Zarruq did a very nice commentary on it. But he says, وَأَمَّا آلَةُ اللَّهْوِ كَالْبُوقِ وَالْغِيطَةِ وَالْعُودِ وَغَيْرِهَا مِنْ آلَةِ الطَّرَبِ فَلَا يُحِلُّ سَمَعُهَا اخْتِيارًا. Sidi Ahmed Zarruq says, as for these instruments of diversion, lahu is diversion, anything that entertains you, diverts you. He says, like the buq, the drum, the ghita, it's like a bagpipe, and then the oud, which is a stringed instrument, and these other types of instruments that are alat al-tarab, they're means by which people are excited. فَلَا يَحِلُّ سَمَعُهَا اخْتِيارًا. It's not permissible to listen to them by choice. So if you're hearing it in a store, doesn't go under that category. But then he says, وما يذكر عن ابن عمر أنه لما اجتاز بصحب الشباب غلق أذنيه. So he passed by a man who was playing an instrument, and he closed his ears. Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu, he plugged his ears. But he was with نافع ولم يأمر نافعا بذلك. يحتمل أن نافعا لم يؤثر عنده فلا يلزمه غلق أذنيه. So what he was saying is, what that indicates is that Nafi' was not affected negatively by these things. And so he didn't have to close his ears. Now he says, and this is Imam al-Wazani, who wrote, I think, one of the finest legal arguments that I've ever heard for the permissibility of music. He was a great scholar from Morocco. And the Moroccans tended to follow the Andalusian school because the Andalusians tended to be more lenient about this. And it's important for those of us who are in the West, in societies where music is profoundly central to the cultural heritage. Even though there's a lot of negative music, nonetheless, music is profoundly central to the cultural heritage. And so we have to be careful about making this an issue whereby people actually are alienated from Islam. So it's very important to have a nuanced understanding of this, because in certain countries in the Muslim world, it's not a problem. But if you take certain types of Islam as the way you introduce people to Islam, that could have a very negative effect. And that's why triaging is very important. You have to let people see what Islam is before you start giving them all the details, many of which are not agreed upon. And this is part of the problem. We've got so many people that think this is Islam and there's no other Islam. It's my Islam or no Islam. And so what he says here, Imam Rawzani, فَلَا يَحِلُّ سَمَعُهَا اخْتِيارًا يعني حيث كانت تؤثر فيه بأن توقعه في محرم. بدليل آخر كلامه حيث قال إن نافعا لم يؤثر فيه فلا يلزمه غلق أذنيه، فهو يفيد أن عدم الحلية خاص بمن يؤثر فيه فتأمله. So what he's saying is, if you really look at the subtlety of this argument, he's saying that if it affects you negatively, then that's really what they're arguing, that you shouldn't be listening to this. And Nafi' was not affected by it, so he did not tell him to close his ears. So had it been haram to hear it, he would have told him to close the ears. Do you see? And so he says, this shows you that the prohibition is specific about the effect that it has on you. That's where the prohibition lies. And then he says, the great Shaykh Abdul Ghani al-Nablusi, he was a famous Shaykh, and he tended to incline towards the permissibility of sama'. So this is very different, because Imam al-Ghazali argues for this, and Abdul Ghani al-Nablusi and others. في رسالته بعد كلامه كذلك جميع الآلات المطربة. He says all of the musical instruments are like that. إذا استعملت باللهو واللعب كانت حراما وإذا خرجت عن اللهو عند أحد زالت الحرمة. So he's saying all of these instruments, if they are used just to completely divert people from what they should be doing or something like that, then of course they fall into that category of prohibition. But it depends on what they're being used for. So, and then he says, ومعلوم أن هذه الآلات المطربة بجميع أنواعها ليست حرمتها من حيث ذاتها وصورها المخصوصة ولا من حيث ما يصدر عنها من الأصوات المطربة، وإلا لكان كل صوت مطربا حراما أو كل صوت مطربا حراما وهو باطل، لأن أصوات الطيور والشحارير المطربة ليست حراما أو المطربة، لأن أصوات الطيور والشحارير المطربة ليست حراما إجماعا بل حرمتها لاقتران اللهو بها ولكونها ملاهي. So he says, it's well known that all of these instruments, all these different types, their prohibition is not from the essence of these things or their forms, whatever specific form they take, but it has to be what they're used for. Because if you argued that, then you would have to say all of the musical sounds that you hear are prohibited, like the sounds of birds. And this is also Imam al-Ghazali's argument. He said you'd have to, when the birds start chirping up, music, because they have maqams. You can actually, if a musician could take a bird song and put it into musical notation, because they're actually singing musical notes. And so he's saying if that's the case, then you'd have to say that all of that is haram. And he said that nobody says that. And then Abdul Ghani al-Nablusi also mentions that Ibn Hajar radiallahu anhu, when he was talking about the prohibition of instruments in a letter he wrote about that, he starts talking about sama' and the mazamir وسائر الملاهي. And he said, ولسنا نحرم مطلق السماع ولا نعتقد أن كل ما يفعل من ذلك فسفساف وضياع بل منهم العارفون وهم حزب الله ألا إن حزب الله هم الغالبون. So even Ibn Hajar is saying we don't think that all of sama' is negative. No, some of it is not a waste of time. So it's important to see that. And I think Another thing, and one of the things that the ulama mention is a lot of this, like I said, is sadd al-dharaya. But part of the problem with the sadd al-dharaya is that when you say something's haram to cut off the pretext of it, the danger of that is to fall under the category of ولا تقولوا تصفوا ألسنتكم الكذب هذا حلال وهذا حرام لتفتروا على الله الكذب إن الذين يفترون على الله الكذب لهم عذاب أليم. You know that the don't say with your tongues in a lying state, this is halal and this is haram, right? Because only Allah can make halal and only Allah can make haram through His Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So if something is not clearly haram in the Quran or in the Hadith, then you have to be very careful. And the later ulama took that road of declaring things halal and haram that the early community did not, and they did it from sadd al-dharaya, and that was their ijtihad. But if when Imam Malik was asked about music, he said, لا يفعله إلا الفساق عندنا. The people that do that are fusaq. They're not pious people. But he didn't say haram la yajuz or something like that. He just said لا يفعله إلا الفساق عندنا واللبيب بالإشارة يفهم. Because they didn't want to do that. And this is why Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah in I'lam al-Muwaqqi'in has a section on the prohibition of calling a fatwa the hukm of Allah. And this comes from a hadith in al-Bukhari where Burayda asked the Prophet ﷺ, if we come to a city, should we nunzilhum ala hukmi Allah? And he said, لا تنزلهم على حكم الله ولكن أنزلهم على حكمك فهو أهون أن تخطئ في حكم أن تخطئ في حكمك من أن تخطئ في حكم الله. Because it's easier, or كما قال, that don't say it's that you'll take their surrender based on the judgment of Allah, but say it's your own judgment. You see, because the ijtihad is your own judgment, and you don't know whether you got Allah's ruling or not. And this is why the fatwas are attempts at getting the ruling of Allah. And that's clarified in usul and things like this. But a lot of people don't know that or understand that. So generally, and then just finally, Sidi Mawaq, when the Mukhtasar of Khalil talks about listening to ghina, he says, ولما حرمت الخمر وكان ضرب الأوتاء ونفخه في المزمار يقارن شربها غالبا ويحرك النفس إلى شربها انسحب حكم التحريم على ذلك بخلاف ما لا يطرب به ولا يدعو إلى الشرب. فانظر قوله بخلاف ما لا يطرب به ولا يدعو إلى الشرب فإن هذا هو الدافع الآن. So he said that Imam al-Ma'ziri said that when the prohibition of khamr came down, of drugs and alcohol, intoxicants, the listening to the autar was related, listening to the oud and these things was related to those things, and also blowing in the pipes and the flutes and things. All of that was related to alcohol and drinking, and it encouraged people to drink. And so the hukam of tahrim went with that. And this is why, this is what Ibn Hazm argues, that if you look at the hadiths, they all have alcohol in them. And he says, بِخِلَافِ مَا لَا يُطْرَبُ بِهِ وَلَا يَدْعُو إِلَى الشُّرْبِ. So this means that the same ruling doesn't go under those things that don't call to the haram and don't call to drinking or cause that. So the dominant position of the four madhabs is that singing is permissible, the duf drum is permissible, some of them permit the flute also, generally stringed instruments. The khilaf is weak on that, so generally the stringed instruments have been prohibited, and it relates to the effect that the stringed instruments, because the stringed instruments are actually far more powerful in terms of their effect on the soul than the percussion instruments. Piano, for instance, is really a percussion instrument, but the stringed instruments, like the oud and sitar and guitar and all these different instruments, they can be very dangerous and people are very profoundly affected by them. So that is generally where the ulama went in terms of those prohibitions. And you will get some that say, like, Ibn Hazm, وَنَغَمَةَ الْعُودِ فِي الْأَحْيَانِ قَالُوا تَزِيلُ أَثَرَ الْأَحْزَانِ. That, like, the tunes of the oud every once in a while will remove depression and get rid of. So he says, وَجْزِمْ عَلَى التَّحْرِيمِ أَيْ جَزْمِ وَالْحَزْمُ أَلَّا تَتْبِعْ إِبْنَ حَزْمِ. But consider them not permissible and don't follow Ibn Hazm. فقد أبيحت عنده الأوتار والعود والطنبور والمزمار, because he permitted all these musical instruments. The Andalusians, like I said, tended to permit that, and my personal belief is that in European and Western Islam generally, that Shaykh Abdullah bin Bayez said, do not bring an Islam with that prohibition as introducing people to Islam. Let people come into Islam with their instruments and all these things, and then wean people off diversion and wasting their time, because Islam is a religion where time is very precious, and those types of things are really diversionary things. So anyway, I spent a little more time than, but I wanted to just cover that. So go ahead, next one.
وللجدال تعتري الأحكام يحرم إن يقصد به الإفحام لجلبه غوائل الملاهي كالعجب والحقد وحب الجاه وقد رأى بعض ذوي البصائر الإثاء إن يكثر من الصغائر. As for debates and dialectics, they fall under the 5 rulings and are prohibited if silencing one's opponent is what is intended. The reason for this is that it engenders destructive matters that have been prohibited, such as contempt, envy, vanity, and love of position in the hearts of men. Indeed, some scholars of penetrating insight have even reckoned recurring disputation to be among the venal sins.
Okay, so basically what he's saying is jidal, which is argumentation. The Prophet ﷺ said, مَا ضَلَّ قَوْمٌ بَعْدْ هُدَى كَانُوا عَلَيْهِ إِلَّا أُوتُوا الْجَدَلِ. That people never go astray after they had guidance, except it's replaced with argumentation. That's actually a quality of people that are astray. They start arguing about everything and they can't agree on anything. And that's why if you know certain qawaid fiqhiyya, like one of them is al-mukhtalaf fihi la yunkaru. If there's disagreement about something, you shouldn't get into arguments about it. The mujma' alayh is what we all agree on. So when you have differences of opinion, do we practice Nus Sha'ban or not? You can clarify what your position is, but don't attack people who take another position when it's a valid position. Do we celebrate the Mawlid or not? These are khilaf issues, and you can present your position. That's fine. Say, look, the Salaf didn't practice it. Here's why we shouldn't practice it, but we recognize there's a khilaf here. And and show the 2 arguments, right? And then leave people alone. But to go and try to stop people from practicing things that are disagreed on, that leads to sectarianism, it leads to division, it leads to hatred, and it splits an ummah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, inna hadhihi ummatukum ummatan wahida wa ana rabbukum fattaqun, right? I'm your Lord. Don't forget who's your Lord. Shakespeare said, "It is idolatry to make the service greater than the God." Sometimes Islam becomes what they're worshiping. All these rules. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ was very generous with people even when they broke the rules, he was very generous. The man who slept with his wife during Ramadan, just look at that hadith, how he dealt with him. The people that were new in Islam, he just told them, eat the meat and say Bismillah and eat the meat. Aisha said, why are you telling him that? Right? Because what you put in your mouth is so important. He said they're new Muslims. Just leave them alone. This is hikmah, this is wisdom. But somebody becomes Muslim, they want them to be like Sahaba the next day, even though they're not like Sahaba. Right? But is this what they expect? No, let them come in with all their faults and blemishes, right? So what he's saying is that, and then Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said, "Ma kan al-jidalu min ad-dini fi shay." Argumentation has nothing to do with our religion. A man came to Imam Malik radiallahu anhu once and he said, "Jadilni, I want to argue with you." And Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said, "Okay, so you beat me, what?" He said, "You follow me." He said, "And I beat you." He said, "I follow you." He said, "What if a third person comes and he beats both of us?" He said, "Then we follow him." He said, "You're going to be on a new religion every day. See you later." I mean, people discovering, I found this new hadith. This stuff's all been worked out. You're not going to discover anything new, right? You might find something out, but the Maliki school knew about it, the Hanafi school knew about it, the Shafi'i school, they all knew about it. They've been debating this stuff for centuries. Why are you reinventing the wheel? So that's, it's very dangerous, all of this argumentation, and but they go under the 5 rulings, right? Ta'tari al-ahkam. It can be wajib. Sometimes you have to argue, and the Nuh alayhi salam, there are people complained that he was always arguing with them. He was trying to save them. So jidal can be to manifest the truth. It can be mandub. It can be mubah. Even they say that for students it's good to debate, but they have to know the rules of debating, so that because it sharpens their mind, so that they can make arguments. Imam Shafi'i radiallahu anhu said that he never got into a debate except he didn't care who won. Ma baraytu agharabani khasmi aw gharabtu. He said, I could care less whether I won the debate or the one I was debating with won the debate. For him, what was important was the truth manifested. That's somebody who doesn't have ego invested in the debate. And then he says, because it brings all of these problems like hiqd and ujub, you get resentment, you get things. So, in the Babah, he said, حُكْمَ الْجِدَالِ تَابِعٌ لِقَصْدِ صَاحِبِهِ. It follows the intention of the one who wants to argue. فَإِنْ قَصَدَ التَّعَنُّتْ وَالْعِنَادِ. If they're just intent obstinacy and they want to just be fanatic about their position, وَخَاصَمَ فِي الْحَقِّ بَعْدَ ظُهُورِهِ, and they're still arguing against the truth after it's manifested, أو بباطن, or something false, أو غلب على ظنه أن خصمه لا ينفع الجدال معه أو كان فيما ليس تحته أمر فممنوع. It's prohibited in all those things if you're just arguing for the sake of argumentation. And Imam Malik radiallahu anhu said, إن أهل بلادنا, meaning al-Medina, the great ulama of Medina, يكرهون الجدال والبحث والنظر. They didn't like any types of debates. إلا فيما تحته عمل دون ما سبيله الاعتقاد, unless it was a fiqh issue that they were trying to resolve. If it was about aqidah, they didn't like it. Don't debate aqidah. Aqidah is what it is. You get into debates about it, you'll end up saying something about God. وَأَن تَقُولُوا مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ الْفَوَاحِشَ إِنَّمَا حَرَّمَ رَبِّي الْفَوَاحِشَ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ وَالْإِثْمَ وَالْبَغْيَ بغير الحق وأن تشركوا بالله ما لم ينزل به سلطان وأن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون. To say about God what you don't know. That is the worst thing that you can do. It's worse than shirk. Ibn Qayyim says that he began by talking about itham because that's the least of things, right? And then baghi, and then shirk, and he ended with saying about God what you don't know. That's the worst thing you can do. So people should have fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that's what he's saying. That if there's action or something like that, then it's a good thing. And then he says, when you read manfa'atan fahuwa ala, this isn't in your text. Ala hasabiha wa karihu ma la wala. So if you want benefit, if he wants benefit, then it's permissible, but you have to look at what way cost-benefit analysis. But it's makruh if there's no benefit or harm. It's just makruh to do it because of the problems that it leads to. And then some of the people of inner sight. Basira is to the intellect what the eye is to the vision is to the eye. So basira is the thing that enables you to see things clearly, intellectually. And so the ulama say that argumentation, if you do it a lot, it's considered a saghira. It becomes a saghira for you to be doing. It's sinful. And we know there are argumentative people. Everybody knows them. There's just people that they like to argue. And abghadu الرجال عند الله اللد الخصم. In the Sahih, the Prophet ﷺ said the people most odious to God are people that love to argue. Mula, right? And they argue just for the sake of argumentation. Allah hates those people. They're odious to Him. So if you have that personality, Safrawi is an argumentative personality. So if you're choleric by nature, you'll tend to incline towards argumentation. Sanguine and phlegmatic don't really like to argue generally, but the choleric is argumentative, and the ulama tend to be choleric by nature. So it's something students of knowledge have to be very careful about that, because it is part of the nature, and it can become like a real sickness of the heart. Next one.
اسمعه لصوته من يعلم بحبها سماعه محرم ورفع صوت من يخاف منها تلذذ عد وعد منها أيضا تشبه الرجال بالنساء في صوتهن أو سواه واعكسا. Also prohibited is one's enabling a woman to hear his voice if he knows that she desires to hear it. Scholars have also reckoned the elevation of a woman's voice to be among the prohibitions if pleasure being derived from it is feared. They also have considered as prohibited men imitating women with their voices or in any other area, and vice versa.
So women tend to be more affected by sound, men are more affected by vision. So a woman will be she'll actually be aroused by sound, whereas the man is aroused by the vision. And so what he's saying is, if you know that there's a alaqa, this first degree of love is called alaqa with the Arabs. If that's there, then it becomes haram, because you can have an effect on them, and it's not good for them, it's not good for you. And then he's saying about also raising the voice of a woman who people will derive pleasure again. These things, I mean, we're in very mixed cultures in the West, but in traditional Muslim countries, there was much more separation. And these rules, if you try to apply these rules in the United States or in Canada or somewhere where you're from, it's not really going to fly. But it is prohibited to take pleasure. If you know you're getting pleasure, then it's haram, and that's very clear. In terms of voice, a woman is not supposed to speak in a seductive voice. In America, that's usually resolved because women they speak like men now, so it's not really a problem. But in traditional societies, you tend to find women had very soft voices. You'll still find this if you go to certain Arab countries and you hear the women talk. It sounds so different from, if you go to, for instance, Mauritania, the women, the way they speak is very feminine. There's a lot of femininity in their words. They know in social studies that women who enter into management will tend to lower the tone of their voice because they get more respect with a less high voice. So you'll find in many Muslim countries, women actually speak with high-pitched voices. Whereas if you'll notice in the West, the tone of the women's voices are actually lower in terms of, because they know that they'll get more respect from the men if they speak in those lower tones.